Welcome, everybody. Really, really amazing to see you all here. It's such a buzz outside the room today, and it feels really very much like a birthday, very much like a celebration, which is just amazing. And just looking out at all of you, it strikes me just how many brains contributed to something like the Start Fund, just how much sweat, how much vision, how much just hours of work went into what we have today. And that video just made me think about all of the lives that all of that brain trust touched. 26 million people in 10 years whose lives are hopefully better because of the work that we all started together. So that's just an impressive figure. And you know, Sean, I don't think I've ever shared a stage with you, but I'm really, it's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to sit here with you. I remember when I first heard of you and I first met you, it was before the World Humanitarian Summit, 8-10 years ago, something like that, when I was working at ODI and working on, what we needed to do to reform the sector. And you had all the ideas. And not only did you have the ideas, but you had the platform. You had the group of people that you had galvanized around yourself to really turn, or like a really prescient vision of what a new era of humanitarian action should look like, into an organization, a network, practical action. And so it's just really lovely to be here with you and to celebrate 10 years of your legacy, and 10 years of what you saw and then what we've managed to achieve. But we also thought, as my colleague said, it was a really good opportunity to reflect back and to think a little bit about where we've come from, what makes us what we are today, and where we're going, where we're headed in the future. So I just wanted to have this chat with you and ask you a little bit maybe first about the origin story. So every startup has its origin story. What's Start Networks?
Good question. Hello, everybody. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to reconnect. On my mantle in my office in Vancouver is the plaque that the board gave me on my last day at the Start Network. And it says, to Sean, for designing, building, and sailing the ship all at the same time. And I think that's a useful framework. It's also a bit of a caveat because my end of job report is 46,000 words. So it's 10 chapters. So there's a lot to this story, and so many people have contributed to it. But I think the origin story is about emergence, is about growing self-awareness in the people and in the collective. But it begins in 2008 with the financial crash. And the British government tried to save money and reduce the number of civil servants, and they needed to write bigger checks. And those bigger checks were going to organizations that could handle a big check, not NGOs, but the UN or the commercial firms. And BOAG, the British Overseas Agencies Group, BOAG, I think that's what they're called, did a study, found that this new circumstance in 2008, 2009 was slowing down the money, and less of it was getting to the frontline organizations, and there were more conditions attached to it. And these conditions were preventing frontline aid workers, whether they're from a local or international organization, from really responding to what the needs were because of all these conditions that needed to be met. And so humanitarian directors, some of whom are in the room today, began to meet in pubs. I was in one of those pubs on Monday called the Cross Keys in Covent Garden. And they began to meet to talk about things that I would now describe as these systemic failures. And so they had several meetings, several curry dinners, and then the government of the day, which is still Labour government, 2009, put out a call for strengthening humanitarian response, a £10 million program. And they said, this is our moment. And they put together a consortium of 12 or 15 organizations, and they submitted a proposal. Now, I've spoken to the civil servant who reviewed the proposals. There was a stack of paper on the desk, paper applications in the day, and NGO A, Program B, NGO C, Program D. And then they came to 15 NGOs, and they could not but fund it. So it was a very clever move by those 15 organizations, and so that was the birth of the consortium of British humanitarian agencies in 2009. It began in February 2009. And there were, it was before my time, because there were disagreements about the character of the director of the program. Some wanted a more programmatic manager, some wanted more leadership. So they went to a headhunter called Parrott Laver, and they talked to Lola Gostelow, who might be here, who should be here, and Lola called me and said, "Hey, this is a really interesting thing. You should give it a try. You should throw in your application." So I did, and they said, "That's fine, thank you." But we don't, they rejected my application. And I was working with a coach at the time, and who said, "Well, tell them they've made a mistake." And so I did. I told them they've made a mistake. You've made a mistake. You should be interviewing me. And then they said, "Oh, okay, we've made a mistake." Oh, so then they did interview me, and then I got the job. And then it started. I started in September 2010, and it was a rocket ship from the beginning. 2 months of crazy work to do a core grant proposal that was then rejected by DFID, and then the Pakistan floods, and then DFID offered 20 million pounds on top of the 10 million or the 8 million that we had, and it was too much. It was super political, and then we navigated that, and then 2011 came along, and then about May 2011, we got called into DFID. "Come and see us. We need to talk to you." So I walked in the door, and there was Jack Jones from DFID, who said, "I'm sorry to tell you, but we're not going to renew your funding." And so this was 1 year into a 2-year pilot study that was producing amazing results. 15 organizations working together in this way was producing a fund that was earlier, faster, and more efficient, cheaper than other pooled funds of a similar nature. And the evidence was unambiguous. It was evaluated many times, and it was unambiguous evidence. But the decision was not based on the evidence. It was based on other things, fights in the Conservative Party, actually, I think, as far as I know. But the end result was a crisis, after just a year into the experiment. And there's more to the story. But you want to see?
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots more to the story, and I just love. I think one of the qualities of a leader of Start Network or a leader of any kind of new initiative in this sector has to be a degree of audacity. And I love the fact that you went back to that interview panel and said, "Frankly, you've made a mistake." I think that's amazing, because we got you, but also because you just went back and told them that. I wanted to ask you, were there any? You've mentioned a few kind of key moments in the early days. But what was that? Was there a key moment when you realized that you had something, that Start Network was something that was viable, that had promise, that kind of light bulb moment where you thought, "I am actually really onto something here, and there's a lot of opportunity ahead of us"?
I think early into the role, maybe others would disagree with me, but I think that there was a financial driver for doing this. Create an aggregator that could take a big check that would compete against the UN. But once we had the structure and once it was rolling, we realized, wow, there's so much possibility here. So many ways to intervene and manipulate the system. So as I said, it was a process of emerging self-awareness. But it was very early on in the experiment when we began to realize, well, we could do some really cool things.
And every origin story to me has its superheroes and supervillains. And so we're among friends here. So I'm sure you can share with us not only who were some of those superheroes, but who, or maybe not so much who, but what were the things that got the most in your way on this journey that was Start Network?
Well, when our funding was canceled by DFID,
Yeah.
There was debate amongst the members, and some of them said, "Well, this is fine. Let's give it up. Let's cancel it." I'm not sure that I should mention the name of the organization, big organization, a really big organization that said no, let's cancel it. But the others said no, let's keep going. And
did you walk back into their office and say, "You've made a mistake"?
Well, what we did do, Marika and I, there were two of us at the time, is we went around the city of London for about a year. And we just talked to people. Can you find us another business model for humanitarian aid that doesn't leave us dependent on whoever gets elected? And so we discovered impact bonds. We discovered pooled financing mechanisms, a loan facility. Richard Broyd here brought insurance, the idea of insurance and catastrophe bonds into our thinking. And so by the end of this kind of year of wandering the city and speaking to all these people, we came to the CEOs and said, look, there's real promise here. We could do a lot of really interesting things to create mechanisms that would create the right incentives to create the behavior that we all want to occur.
So then who were those superheroes?
Who are the superheroes? I mean, it was a collective endeavor. So a lot of the board members, some of whom are in the room, Nick is here. Nick was the chair for some time. A lot of the early people around and we met as a board once a month for 3 hours once a month for 5 years. It was like heavy going. And Lima's here too. I mean, I think everybody around the table was trying to do the right thing for the system, not for their organizations. We started for financial reasons, create an aggregator, get more funding, be able to disperse it. And then we realized, wait, we can write the rules. As soon as we have more than one donor, we can write the rules around how that money is dispersed. And the rules can create the right incentives and create the right systemic behavior. But it still required courage in the board to do things that they felt that their organizations may not necessarily, initially accept.
Yeah, no, I remember. So I don't know if any of you know this, but Sean has written all of this down in sort of a memoir or a book, or I don't know what you would call it, but a really interesting analysis of those early days. And it was sort of his gift to me when I took over. Sort of here's what our legacy is. Here's what we started, and here are some recommendations of how I would take this forward. And in preparing for tonight, I was rereading that book, which it's really funny because all of the things that you predicted did happen, and all of the things you warned me about did happen, and some of the problems still exist. So in some ways, we haven't gotten that far. But I remember one thing in that story at the very beginning, which was sort of why you did it, but also what you recognized was the biggest blocker, and that was you were very intentional about the fact that Start Network was going to be a disruptor by incumbents. And the expression in the UK, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, right? I mean, people must have thought you were crazy, that you were going to try to change a centuries-old sector from within, with people that had no incentive to do anything differently because it threatened their jobs, their organizations, their livelihoods, and their work, and frankly, the people at the other end of crisis response. So how did you overcome that?
I want to shout out Irish Aid as one of the heroes. I don't know whether anyone from Irish Aid is here today, but they gave us a core grant to keep going during those wilderness years, and so they're one of the heroes. Yeah. So it was about paradise. So Roz Tennyson from the Partnership Brokers Association wrote this great series of case studies on the emergence of the Start Network, and one of them is called Dealing with Paradox, and I think that's, we are Start is you are a group of incumbents trying to change the humanitarian system, and so that is an endeavor rife with paradox. So first of all, naming it and accepting it is the important thing. But it's hard, and in that, a lot of the members are large organizations that are driven by financial requirements, and so one needs to, portray a future vision of that's attractive enough for all the organizations, big and small, local and international. And that involves, money, and it also involves changing how that money is deployed so that it creates the types of behaviors that those of us who've been trying to change the system, have tried to do. I don't know whether that answers your question or not, but it's not a straightforward answer. I think that one of the things that we probably got, you get pushed to be transactional, and this is an endeavor that's not about transactions. It's about a vision. It's about shifting, how systems work, and that's emergent.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those issues that one of those things I was mentioning that still kind of pervades the system. I think there are I think where it's come in 10 years, where the Start Fund has come in 10 years, is a lot of strong support for it, a lot of admiration for it, a lot more money for it, which is great. We always need more, but it's great. But still, still those tensions between organizations that are traditionally competitive and putting them into a collaborative environment where we sort of force them to make decisions together sometimes works beautifully, in fact, elegantly. And sometimes it's still rife with enormous amount of tension. So I think, we still have a long way to go on disruption by incumbents. But it's been a fascinating journey, I think, from where you started and to where we've ended up. So maybe just two more questions from me, if you guys will allow. What would you then, looking sort of back, looking at yourself 10 years ago, what would you have done differently? And what advice would you give to me now? What advice would you give to the people in this room who are still supporters, staff members, partners of Start Network? What advice would you give to all of us about what we should do differently, but also what the potential is? What future do you see for Start Network?
That's a huge question.
So, I know.
First of all, don't take it personally. Okay, I did take it personally. And it's hard not to. When you're talking about the future, you're talking about, a different way of working. You incite the white blood cells of the system, and a system has millions of interconnections and transactions and relationships, and when you try and change that, all of those relationships and interactions and connections push against that change, and it can be very tiring for somebody who's trying to make it happen. So the first thing I would say to myself is not to take it personally, and I would say to you and your colleagues here that this is very hard, and it should be hard. It's naturally hard. So not to take it personally. The second thing I would say is to invest in and take care of each other, because it's so tiring, because it's so complex, because it's so much work, because it can be thankless. It's important to take care of each other, and I would tell myself 10 years ago to take care of the team more than I did, and the third thing I would say is I have my cheat sheet in my pocket, but I forgot what the third thing I was going to say. But those are. I mean, I guess investing in the systems. So there's this, a network of incumbents that are trying to change the system, getting funding from traditional sources, needs needs enough systems and compliance and due diligence in order to comply with the rules associated with the money. So you need some systems, and I lost patience. I was exasperated from the first day of just how crazy the system is and how much unnecessary process is. I actually commissioned a consultant who went into DFID and ODA's history and found that the original act that started ODA is only like 5 sentences long, and everything else has been invented by the civil servants and the parties of the day in charge. So all of this process really has no, mandate. It's just been invented, and so we find ourselves running gerbils in a wheel, chasing each other, and I lost patience with that. However, you got to do it. You got to do some of it, and the question is, how do you invest in enough administration, operations, systems without perpetuating the status quo, and I think that's the creating a vision around the future is one thing, but it's the underlying infrastructure that is the important thing to get right, and you need enough, but not too much. You have to create an infrastructure that allows change to happen.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at Suzanne here because I'm sure she would agree with you wholeheartedly. Suzanne, our CFOO, who deals with the operational side of what we do all day. And it's still one of those tensions that is alive and well in Start Network. How do we meet the system where it is, because we are inside it, while pulling it in another direction? And there's this theory of change, which is, if you start to just play a different game somewhere else, people will stand up and notice, and then they'll join you in playing that game somewhere else. So I think that's kind of what we seek to do. We seek to model the change we want to see so that people come and join us where we are. But at the same time, because we're being fed by that same system, we have to meet the system where it is. And we go through this, I don't know, Suzanne, hours every day talking about how we're going to get around this. So it's very much alive and well in Start Network. Maybe just one more question, and this is of personal interest to me, but maybe of interest to others in the room, is, you've moved on, now live in Vancouver, and thanks so much for traveling from Vancouver for this event. It really makes me so happy to have you here for this. You're in Vancouver, and you're an entrepreneur and innovator, kind of in your heart. It's sort of in your DNA to be an inventor, to be an entrepreneur. You're in Vancouver, you're working for a company that is trying to reimagine carbon capture or come up with innovative ideas for capturing carbon in the atmosphere. So you've had a taste now for a couple of years about corporate entrepreneurism. And I guess I wanted to know how your experience now compares to the adapreneurism, no, that's a terrible word. The entrepreneurism that you experienced at Start Network, or the entrepreneurism of aid. And if it's even possible to be an entrepreneur in our sector.
That's also a big question.
But you're going to answer it because you're on stage.
There are lots of transferable skills. I mean, I work in the private sector now, and I found that it took a couple of years to figure out how to transfer what I learned and knew from humanitarian aid, but there's a lot of transferable skills. And entrepreneurship in the non-for-profit humanitarian sector is the same. The financing mechanisms are different, of course, but the dynamics and what you have to do are very similar.
So how do we encourage more of it?
It's true that in the commercial sector, and particularly in Silicon Valley, they laud the entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are heroes. The new American heroes are entrepreneurs, and I'm not sure that entrepreneurs in humanitarian aid, at least when I was there, are as lauded, as recognized and promoted. But I think that anyone who chooses to do humanitarian aid is at heart has some degree of entrepreneurialism in them, and anyone who responds to a crisis where things are falling apart has to be entrepreneurial in order to save lives in an environment where that there's a lot of entrepreneurialism in the DNA of everybody in the room. We just need Start Network to provide the space so that we can be entrepreneurial.
Yeah, no, and I think there's another line in your book that is about safe failing, as opposed to fail safe. And I think safe failing is, an attribute or a quality or something, along with courage and openness and inclusivity, that we talk about and we want to practice in Start Network, because we have to fail sometimes in order to be entrepreneurs or to change anything, but we have to fail safely because of the type of work that we have to do. And what's inspiring is that we have a membership, we have a partnership, and we have our donors that are willing to fail safe. That's been really, really lovely to see, and long may that continue, because then maybe entrepreneurship will grow in this sector, a sector that needs change more than anything. So, thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Christine.
Sorry to put you on the spot on a few of those, but thanks for all of the wisdom you've imparted. There's so many new people in this room and new partners of Start Network, so it was great to hear where it all came from.